The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
Welcome to Aging Like a Badass. I'm Kimberly Price, your 40-something host, and I'm on a mission to create the trusted spaces to help you navigate life's wrinkles. Hide from uncomfortable conversations? Not a chance. The raw and real is the rocket fuel that ignites change, and there is no better time than the present to excavate the messy and activate your inner superpower to create a life you love. So stick around and get ready to learn the tips, tricks, and truths to age like a badass, because wrinkles aren't the problem, they're the solution. Welcome to Aging Like a Badass. I'm Kimberly Price, your host, and today in the house, our episode is Unpacking the Unpackable with special guest Audrey Godwin. Audrey trains women to create financial stability and sustainability from a place of freedom. And you are in for a real treat today. Audrey is an amazing woman, so much wisdom, so much insight, and she's doing incredible things in the world. So Audrey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So glad to be here.
I'm excited that you're here. I feel like today we were talking before the show, and I always have a little bit of something we're talking about before the show, but like my energy today is off somehow. I have this, and you were talking about just this higher vibration of energy, feeling, jittery today. So hopefully throughout our conversation, we can balance the energy a little bit today.
Yeah, no, I hope so. Yeah, it's just odd to wake up as if you had just had a couple of cups of just black espresso. So I'm like, something must be up, or I didn't do what I needed to before I went to bed. So
I know it's easy to do that for sure. Well, I'm excited you're here. We have had an amazing conversation a few weeks ago on the phone, and I was so excited to have you as a guest on the podcast. You have so much wisdom and so many things that you're doing that I'm excited to share with the audience today. So very happy that you're here today.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So formally, prior to where you are in your life now and the things that you're doing, you have done some exciting things, some big things, and then shifted into the things that you're doing today. And so one of the things that you talk about on your website, which I think, I'm always jotting down during the podcast because there's so many things that I want to take away, so many things that I want to keep sharing and learn. But one of the things that grabbed me is it takes courage to be wealthy. It's actually a revolutionary act, and it's never too late to get started. Yeah. And that was really impactful for me. It's interesting that I'm sitting here with you today and it's interesting that we met and the things that you've done. Because I am in this season of really taking responsibility for my finances for the first time in my life.
Oh, wow.
And I'm 48 years old, and I've taken responsibility and done a lot of other things in a lot of places. But this is the season of working on something that for me, this holds so much meaning.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit about this because I know that there are a lot of listeners, especially, women, that this is a really, really hard topic. It's really easy to get this here, but to really get this here, it's hard. It's hard. So I want to dive into that a little bit and dive into, what took you in the place that you are today.
Wow. How much time do we really have for all of that, right? So I had a 20 plus year career as a CPA and a chief financial officer. So sometimes I worked within companies, sometimes I was just a consultant. And when I was working with women business owners in particular, they would just default to, well, whatever you say. And I'm like, well, hey, this is your company. So you need to understand the financial impact of a business decision. Or if I was working on a personal financial plan for a couple, the woman would always be like, oh, well, he handles it. And sometimes he'd be like, that's fine. And sometimes you could see panic in his face as if, well, I don't know what I'm doing either, but he won't say anything because she's already abdicated responsibility for this, right? And so the other thing that came up through all this work over the years was that we tend to also compartmentalize, right? So it's like, if I'm dealing with my health, I'll just deal with my health. Well, money touches everything. And so for us to say, I have a crisis and the first thing I'm going to do is like figure out my finances, it's in the wrong order. Right? Like if you're experiencing a crisis, then you got to process the emotions. Yeah. Deal with that first and then settle yourself down to go like, okay, now how is this going to impact me financially? And what do we, and I'm talking like a household, right? Right. Whether you're in the household by yourself or with, family and friends or whatever, like how is this going to impact us financially? But we've been trained by what we hear on the news and the media that, women are not good at math and, we don't do science. And so we have we accept it, right? So we don't challenge it. And then if you start to listen to what the financial services industry puts out, right, is we're always behind. We don't know how to invest. We don't ask questions. Yet when you listen to like Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, right? He invests in women because he makes the greatest returns on the businesses that are led by women. One, because we're thoughtful, so we think holistically. Right. And so we tend to want to do things that will make sure that the people are taken care of, as well as us making profit, as opposed to scaling so quickly just to get the exit strategy so that they can line their pockets, right?
Where the people are left behind.
Exactly. Right. So I think over the years, what I've come to recognize is that if we're not on a journey of self-development or awareness or just healing those things in our soul, right? Because we get messages from the time we're like enter the planet about, especially for women, and it doesn't really matter what country you're in and how we are less than, right? So our family of origin, our ethnicity of origin, our society, all of the things that we hear in media make us fractured in our soul. And so as we're trying to learn and heal, then it becomes, oh, I need to become a better financial manager. We spend a lot of time talking about, I'm building my empire and all of these things. Sorry.
It's okay.
Gosh. Sorry. So, oh my gosh. Okay. So, where did I leave off? Sorry, dog distracted me.
Yeah. So talking about financial manager, becoming the fragmented part of where we're at.
So the thing that we don't talk about enough is financial management. We're always talking about building things and having an empire and having all these assets for, inheritance purposes and all that. But we don't realize that our legacy starts with how we show up in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So if we spend as women all of our time focused on, we have to close the wage gap and we have to close the wealth gap. And so we're constantly focused on how we're just going to reach for that next $1,000, $100,000, $1 million. Then that's what is being viewed by other women, younger women, our kids, our nieces and nephews, is that in order for us to get to where we need to be, we kind of forsake everything else in order to get, to close this gap that we haven't really defined for ourselves as what is the real gap. Right now, granted, some of us are under earning for sure, but none of us have taken enough time to go, if feminism says I can have it all, then I get to define what all is.
Yes. And that isn't an overarching umbrella of all.
Right? Exactly.
Right. Which really sets us up for failure, because as we know, we can't be it all the time.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Well, and I truly think that, the idea of it all is that, you have to have a career, you have to have kids, and,
Mhm.
and and what it does, as women, it divides us, right?
Mhm.
So those that feel like their true calling is to be a wife and a mom, great. And
Mhm.
so if that's all and everything to her, then we should celebrate that. Just like if someone chooses not to have kids or wants to have a career and children, great, and then they get to define it. But the issue really is that we allow our all to be defined externally.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's what keeps us exhausted. And so literally, as we're climbing the corporate ladder, or we're having our kids in all the activities, right, because it looks good, our
Mhm.
soul is dying. Like our soul looks like the crypt keeper, and then we wonder why our body starts to break down.
Yeah. So when we look at this, we know that a lot of these things start from a very young age. Food and
Mhm.
money are two things that we can't give those up. So those aren't
Right.
things that, like you said, we can compartmentalize and put in a box and get to them later. They are in our everyday life forever, as long as we're here in existence.
Exactly.
And many of these things start from things that happen in our childhood, ways that we're growing up, like you said, cultural things, societal things, all of the things. And so
Mhm.
when we look at that, if I'm sitting here listening today and I know that this is something that's important, this is something that I definitely want in my life. And I know that I can't put it in the box as the only thing that I work on, because there's always
Right.
going to be all these other things that I'm working on.
Mhm.
What's step one of getting started in this? So I'm just going to use myself as an example. I've
Sure.
been through a lot of personal healing in a lot of areas of my life, traumas that I've had. Age gives me wisdom and healing in ways that I wouldn't have had 10 or 15 years ago. My cancer
Right.
diagnosis gave me healing and things. Spiritually, I feel like I'm healing. So I'm not sitting here in a completely empty or just coming to a place in my life where I'm awakening to all of this,
Right.
but I'm definitely just awakening to this piece of it.
Right. Right.
So what's step one in this? Where do I go with this?
So I think, what I have walked, clients through is, we start to vision, right? And I know it sounds crazy because every year, January, right, like let's have vision board parties, but we have a journal, right? I always tell our clients, it's like, you need to write down the vision, right? Not just go to magazines, because again, then you're allowing external things to imprint themselves upon you, and so now you think that's what you want. So it's really quiet of like, in every area of your life, what does it look like 10 years from now, right? And just write it with no editing, just what do you call stream of consciousness thought, right? Like just
Yeah.
write down, and there are like prompts we'll go through. And the last one is always finance, right? We start with the spiritual and the mental and the emotional and family and relationships and record, right? And then it's okay. So what is material possessions and finances look like for you in this season, right? And so because what it is that it allows you to really dream about what's possible in a 10-year period, as opposed to, and then after you do all that writing, then you can go grab magazines or whatever it is that you want to find the images that represent what you wrote, right? So then it becomes, okay, so this is what I'm clear about. And then we talk about priorities. Okay, so based on everything that you've seen here, in the next 12 months, what are going to be, let's say, your top 6 priorities? Now, you're not going to work in them all at the same time.
Right.
You may do, the top 3 for the 90 days that are coming up, just so that you can find your rhythm, right? But you'll figure out your priorities. And then when you set your goals, you need to make sure, one of the things, and I know people talk about SMART goals all the time, but the thing that's missing is it's not tied to a value, because you really have to just, decide what your values are at this current point in time in your life, right? So tie the goal to a value, and then we ask, and why are you doing this, right? So again, getting clear of like, is it really because in the back of my mind I hear, whatever voice that's telling me, well, you have to lose this weight because you have to look a certain way, or now it's I'm going to be 60 this year, right? So it's like, oh, the 60s are the new 30s. I don't want to be 30 again, right? So 60 is the new 60, right? Because what it means is that I'm fully embodied. I'm really working on my health intentionally, right? Like I don't have to necessarily have a health diagnosis, a health scare for me to get healthy, right? It's different things. So then it becomes, okay, so why am I really doing this? And then then the next questions we ask are, so what financial resources are needed to help support this goal? And then how are you going to manage that? Nobody asks those questions. It's here's the goal, and then we'll just figure it out. It's like, no, look at your budget. And a budget's not just, it's restrictive. It's you've decided that this is what the priority is. And so you have to see where in your budget that's going to fit in, because you might already be spending money on it, right?
Yeah.
So like, if you want to get healthier, it doesn't mean like all of a sudden, like you have to now only shop at Whole Foods and only get organic, because you don't need to buy everything that's organic. So to speak, right. It's doing a little research and massaging your food budget, but it's just sort of like being aware that now that you made these decisions, where and how you spend your money right now, is this going to fit? Are you going to have to reallocate something? And then how are you going to manage to that? Like now you're going to start creating an anchor behavior around finances to make sure that this whole thing is on track, and you can't use money as an excuse that it's not getting done.
Right. And I think it's important too to understand all of this happens one day at a time. One step at a time. Otherwise, it can become so overwhelming. I always compare it, for me, it's being able to look at, because I've been in nutrition and wellness so long, it's looking at, if somebody has 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 50 pounds, 100 pounds to lose, when they're in that state of just getting started, that 100 pounds can seem a lifetime away.
Right.
Creating the habits, doing the work, figuring out what foods work in the body, what foods don't work, decreasing inflammation. I mean, all of the things seem overwhelming. However, and this is a question that I wanted to get to with you, do you believe, and I know your answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, do you believe that accountability is one of the most important things when you're starting on a journey like this?
Oh, for sure. And in this area of finance, right, in money, it's almost as if you're now inviting me into your bedroom, right? So I always joke with clients of like, hey, so you want me to be your partner in helping you change these behaviors, and it's not going to be like 21 days of a habit, because nobody looks at their money every day. Right. And if they are, it's because they're allowing their anxiety and their emotions to drive that behavior. Right. So it might be 6 months. We have to create a rhythm and a cadence to look for these things, right? Bills get paid at a certain time. You get paid at whatever the case may be. We create a rhythm and a cadence. But accountability is important. So what I tell clients is, if I am now your partner in success in this, then really what you've done is I come to your front door, you let me in, I run straight into your bedroom, and I'm now in your underwear drawer.
Love it.
That's what it feels like. It's like, oh my gosh, because I can tell you from the pattern of spending or the pattern of investing, it's like you're out of alignment and you don't even realize that, what your vision and your values and priorities say one thing, but how you spend your money. And so we're going to have to make small adjustments. And I think because we live in the country we live in, it's always go big or go home, which makes food and money the most challenging, because it's like, well, we just have to do this all at one time. Or, I can't be generous. Well, you can do $5 a month, can't you? Well, that doesn't feel like a lot. But if everybody gave $5 a month, this organization could move forward more easily, right? But it always has to be something big and something dynamic, and have to have my name on a building kind of stuff. And it's like, this is the stuff that's really killing us inside, because it's not really what we want to be doing, but we don't want to be ostracized because, well, I'm not doing that, or even back in the day when I first started my career, it's like, I'm on a budget. I'm just starting out. And so, we'd all get together, all of us new in our careers would get together for happy hour, right? Because the appetizers were like 2 for 1. So we could all pool our money to share our food, right? But we don't do that anymore. And then once people start getting promoted, all of a sudden it's like, well, don't ask me what I'm making because you shouldn't know. And it's like, Well, why not? Because if we want, to do some research because we want to get a promotion, like what should we be negotiating for? But nobody's willing to have those conversations.
Yes. Yes. And the level of vulnerability that comes in it is significant. Like you said, it's like being in the underwear drawer. It's like sharing the things about yourself,
right.
That are hard to share. They feel, shame. I'm sure shame is
shame and guilt and embarrassment for sure.
Yeah. So how often do you work with, because one of the things, and I say this as not an excuse, right, at all, just an observation of sort of, if you take knowing what you don't know, and then you get to a place of now you know what you know, and then you get to take both of those and put those together to create this cadence or this rhythm. How significant have you found that? So we talk about culture and environment and those things. How significant are those? Because in my particular case, I had a lot of trauma when I was young, and I'm ADHD, which, the trauma played a role in making the ADHD present, which then also causes me, as I look at, I'm just looking at it from an overarching view, not a victim, not this is the reason why I'm this way and I can't change it, because I don't believe that.
Right.
But a not knowing, a lot of the decisions I've made financially have been because of those things, unknowingly in the past.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that we need to do when we start to get to the place of like, oh, I made that decision, is to give yourself grace. Right? Because I think what we tend to do, and I don't know why this is a thing with us. Maybe it's a humanity thing of, well, if we take the person we are today and put them back in that situation as if that person back then, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, could have made a different decision, as opposed to just being honest of, I did know better, but I didn't want to do better because I allowed my emotions to drive it, or my motivation was really something different, right? Like just to be honest, and then just give yourself grace and go, okay, so from this point, if I want to be in alignment, then I'm going to be intentional about looking at my finances, but understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like, what's the true motivation, right? I was telling a friend of mine a couple of months ago, I said, people don't realize that, we talk about poverty being a mindset, but it's also a motivation, right? Think about people who come from very humble, poor beginnings. They never want to be there. That's their motivation for doing what they do. So everything else gets blocked out because I just don't want to be poor. And then you can see by how they steward their body, how they steward their relationships, how they steward their money, that's a motivation for them. They just never want to run out. Right. So, you might have a pantry full of food. Or you see, like, I kind of chuckle because I look at these extreme couponers and I'm just like, you have a whole grocery store in your basement. You're never going to be able to use all of this food. Why are we not giving it? It's like a food bank, right? Like, and that's just kind of where my mind goes. But I do think that we have motivations that we won't uncover until we are honest about why we're earning. Like, why are we in the job we're in? Why are we, why are we, spending as fast as we earn, right? Because, the fundamentals of financial literacy are fairly basic, right? But the idea of like, well, spend less than what you earn. Now, first of all, cost of living is going up ridiculously, especially if you're in larger urban areas, right? It's like, oh my gosh, right? So your grocery budget, just increased by 20%. Like, I have a basket full of stuff that almost cost me my whole paycheck, right? Which is, I'm joking, but it's that kind of reality. And at the same point, we're also, as women, not negotiating appropriately. We're not doing the research for our salaries, and we're not negotiating appropriately because we think, and for some of us who come from other cultures, so I'm Puerto Rican, it's just sort of the, and it might be different for younger women now. But back in the day, it was like, we were just grateful to get a job. We were just, we were grateful for the opportunity. So we just really worked hard And then we had to be twice as good as anybody in the workplace to keep our job, but we were paid, much, much less. And then I finally figured out like how to maneuver the system, right? Oh, this is what I should be making. Great. I want to learn this. So I'm okay with taking a lateral move. But the next time I go for a job, then this is where I'm starting. And then I can figure out what's the resentment number. There's a number I can't go below because if I do, then I'm going to resent going to work every day.
I love that. I love that. And I would love to take this opportunity to go back. So I know a lot of your story. You shared it with me. And, take us back to, so you're Puerto Rican, you grew up in the Bronx. Sister, you have a sister.
I have a younger sister, yes.
Yes. And that experience of growing up, because we talk about culture and race, and what did that look like, coming up in a world in the time that, you were in, I'd share more of that, because that's a part of this as we look at, where we've come from, where we're going, what we need to do. Those are all things that we need to talk about. We need to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like my mom took us, my sister and I, out of New York. I was in 8th grade. I was going to enter 8th grade. Right. And it was a surprise because we were going on vacation. And then a month later, she enrolled us in school. And it's like, what is happening here? So we went from the Bronx to Texas, a small town in Texas. So sort of like Mayberry, because this was 1976, right? Growing up, us growing up in the Bronx. So, I was in the projects, but it was, if you want to get out of the projects, you have to keep your legs closed and get to college. That was like the only, like, just get out. That's how you get out, is through education. I'm not sure that's the only way out anymore, but back then you had to get an education. You had to get to college in order to get out, or get a good job, right? Because back then, that's when people still work at one employer for 20, 30, 40 years, which is unheard of anymore, right? So that shaped it, in my particular family, and it's like women are not quite as valued. Like, we're good for keeping the house clean and cooking the meals and having the kids, but we're not as valued as the males of the family are. And so for me, not thinking, because the other thing that and I can't tell you when it took hold in my brain. It was like, oh, so as a woman, as a girl, I'm either going to be pretty or I'm going to be smart. So if I'm going to be pretty, that's when all the boys are going to talk, like, I will end up being married. But if I'm smart, then I need to get a good job. And I can't tell you how that got synthesized, probably watching my dad and his brothers, and my mom's brothers, and how they talked about women, or how they talked about their wives and girlfriends. And so it was like, oh, well, nobody's like, I didn't consider myself pretty. I'm like, well, I'm smart, so I better make sure I have a job. Right. So, I mean, and that, again,
you couldn't be both in your mind. Those were
in my mind, no.
Things. No. Okay.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, and even now, I mean, we celebrate those young women who are, have looks and are smart, but it's still, I don't know why we have the delineation, but we still do. Right. So I can't tell you exactly when I thought that was a thing. Like, no, it was so like, well, I'm smart, and no Puerto Rican man wants to marry someone who's smart, because, and of course, and it's, a little machismo, all of, again, it's just the broken soul of the culture, right? As opposed to looking as both capable partners in a marriage. It's, nope, you have your place, I have my place, and you can't be smarter than me. And if you are smarter than me, you just have to dumb yourself down to make me feel good. And it's just like, it's exhausting. And I fell into it. Right. And so not recognizing my own sense of unworthiness, right? Because there was a whole divorce, my parents' divorce. It was nasty. It was brutal. It was, I kept thinking at some point in time, we'd be moved back to New York so we could be closer to family. And so I carried for a long time, like, there should be something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. My own father won't come back to get us and move us back to where all of our family is. And that also impacted how I spent money. unknowingly, right? Unconsciously of well, you know, I had to, you know, and I always invested in good things because I always loved fashion. And I'm like, well, at least, and back then you could spend money on things that would last. Here, if you can still spend a lot of money on garments that actually don't last.
That don't last, right?
Right. And
fast
so,
fashion.
You know, exactly. Well, and even in, you know, better made clothes, right? They don't really last as long. I mean, denim is not as thick as denim used to be.
Yeah.
Right. So even when you pay your $175 for, you know, your whatever jeans,
right,
they're not going to last as long as the, you know, the old time Wranglers and Levi's from back in the day. They're just not.
Yeah.
So my spending became, I just needed to look the part because I never felt the part because I really felt unworthy. So as I continued, you know, on in life, you know, I ended up getting married, having kids. I met my ex-husband because clearly we're divorced. If I say ex-husband, we met in the military. I thought we had this great relationship because we could talk about everything. You know, he read, I read, and then over time, the facade became too heavy, and then it was like, oh, we are overspending and trying to be in partnership with him. Of I don't want to, like, I want us to have healthy finances. We can't really do these things. I mean, I'll give you an example. We moved once we got out of the base, we moved closer to where both of us worked. And so we were renting this house and the owner was like, I want to sell it. I want to be a landlord anymore. And I'm like, oh, okay. We didn't have money. We didn't have a down payment, right? Like I'm still struggling to get him to stop using credit cards and come together. So, you know, he's like, oh no, we'll do no money down. We'll do the second, you know, like, so basically, you know, he made us a sweet deal and offer because he wanted out of being a landlord.
Yeah.
And literally 3 days before closing, my then husband was like, well, you know, I want to start looking around. I'm like, no, we're not going to get a better sweetheart. This is a sweetheart deal. We're just going to have to do, right? But we were unprepared for home ownership, right? Because it's one thing to rent and call the landlord, dishwasher's broken. Hey, when are you going to put the fence up? Now we have to do all of that.
Yeah.
And so that became the sort of the struggle, you know, that wasn't the main struggle. Like money wasn't the struggle. We had other issues in our marriage.
Yeah.
But
the underlying.
So money is never the issue. Like if people tell you like, oh, we didn't get along because she's a spender and he's a saver or whatever the case may be, that's not it. It's usually there's trust broken, there's communication issues, it's relationship issues before it ever gets to money. And so the more clear that I was getting, like, this is what we need to do. And I would sit down and propose something. I'm like, hey, what do you think? Because this is a partnership. And then of course he'd like, that's fine. And then he wouldn't do his part. And then throw back at me of like, oh, well, you're the CPA. Why isn't this working? It's like, bro, I'm not by myself. And so eventually we got divorced. And because it had become so terrible and toxic, the separation and divorce was really hard. And I went into mediation knowing that if I used his retirement, because we had been married almost 25 years. Yeah. And so, you know, I get half of everything, right? Like it's a 50-50 split all the way down. And so I knew that he had a retirement pension that was coming. And I'm like, I can hold that. I just need him to sign the parenting plan that keeps my children safe, my son in particular. And, you know, I'm ready to walk away with everything. The attorney was just like, do you? I said, no. I said, you don't, like, I can make more money. I am not going to fight with this man over money and assets, things that I can make more money. I can buy more things. But this has been hard on my kids and I can't shatter their souls to prove a point to him. So at 50, divorced, with whatever money was in my bank account and my business bank account, and we started over. And then I closed my CPA firm 3-4 years later because I was done doing that. And I've been doing consulting as an outsourced CFO, worked with a few startups internally as an employee to get their financial system set up. And so now, you know, all that to say that I'm at the place now where we really need to, I feel called to really come alongside and teach and train women how to make these adjustments in their finances that are really in alignment with who they are at the moment, and give them the framework so that it's like, you don't have to keep, like, I've had clients that stay with me, the entire 13 years of my firm.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And some of them came from prior firms I used to work at. And I'm like, great. But, so some of them I have known longer than the 13 years. So, but the whole point of the training is to give you a framework so that you can navigate this. So if you get, like in your instance, you had a breast cancer diagnosis, so that all of a sudden your finances don't unravel because you have this diagnosis. You now have a framework where you can go, okay, I'm going to have this woosah moment. Yes. And I'm going to feel whatever I'm going to feel from what I just heard, whether it's I'm getting a divorce, I have a disability, I have a diagnosis, mm-hmm. my debt is overwhelming, there's a natural disaster, right? Tornado just came through. Mm-hmm. At the moment to just feel what we're going to feel. And then if there are things that we need to take care of, like, like if it's a natural disaster, where's FEMA? Like, take care of those things and then finally go, how is this going to affect my finances? Like, that mm-hmm. always has to be the last. And yet we don't process, like, we don't even feel the initial grief, shock, whatever. We just go, well, this is going to jack up my finances. And like, how are we going to do this? And we don't ever integrate those feelings until either our body gives way, right? Because, or something else happens, like a close friend passes because they were working so hard to provide for their family that, one, they didn't have any relationship with their family, but the stress of their job killed them on the job.
Yeah. And I feel like the pendulum, when I listen to your story and, I look at where things were prior to, let's say, the 50s, and mm-hmm. then we go through the feminist movement and all of the things that have happened over the decades. And here we are today. It's like, now we have to come back to center. So we've gone from this place of, women years ago, really probably many of them not having a lot of knowledge in finances at all.
Sure.
Being at home and their role being in that, men taking care of most of the work, and not all the time, right? We're just speaking generally. Right. Going through the feminist movement, having women go out into the workplace, fighting for, we talk about equality and equity and all of those things, and almost swinging to the other direction, but yet not having the training necessarily in it. And then also not being able to integrate what a woman, as women, we are more emotional beings, and we are more apt to look inward than outward, even though we can say that most of what we're doing right now is looking outward. And that's probably part of the problem, is that we aren't trusting our intuition. We aren't relying on what's inside of us, the strengths that we have and the power, inside of us. So we've come to this place now where what I see the work that you're doing and it being so important is, so we're in this season, these decades, I don't know, this time of, we need to be able to do, we talk about being able to do it all or be it all. And a huge part of that is this inner work mm-hmm. that we get to do. And these little pieces of knowing your finances, taking part in that, whether you're married or you're not married, confidence, the things we're looking for as women, more of, right? We're looking for more confidence. We're looking for more courage. We're looking for less overwhelm, less exhaustion, all of these things.
For more peace. I think if we're going to be really honest about it, I think we're looking for more peace.
Yes.
Right? Because, the pandemic just magnified lots of trauma for a lot of people, especially in more underrepresented communities. Like if you are a part of, the BIPOC community, like it was, the traumas were deepened, right? They were more heightened. So part of the conversations we're not having is about our mental health, right? Like, hey, I am depressed, I am anxious, I am unsettled, whatever the case may be, I am sad. And I'm going to push back a little bit because you said, hey, women are more emotional. No, men are emotional too. Men externalize their emotion. Why do you think we're at war all the time?
Yeah, true.
They're going to beat up so men externalize their emotions, women internalize their emotions. So
True.
we abuse our bodies. We like, it's always got to be, oh, it must be me. No, it's not you. He's a jerk or she's a jerk.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So I think we're both like we were created to be emotional, right? Like emotions are part of our makeup as humans. I just think that for women, we don't talk about certain things because it's taboo, right? Like in the 50s, the wife was given the money, like, dad, the man would cash his paycheck. Here's what you get to run the household. So she knew how to budget. It's not that you don't know how to budget, but if you're making just enough to just get by, then there really isn't a budget, because that's all there is.
Yeah.
Right. We don't, when we talk about, wanting to do good work, like going into a nonprofit, is like all of a sudden the salaries drop significantly. Why? Because in this country, we think that to run a nonprofit, like you should have no more than 15% going to quote overhead. Well, if those people go away, that organization stops running, because the program all the programs need the operations to keep them going, right?
Yes.
But we're so focused on, well, it has to be this and not that. And so, and we have been trained, right? Is like, oh, but if we're doing charitable work, if we're doing good work, no, if we were doing work that we are meant to be doing, there's no shame and guilt in earning a really great living from doing things that we are naturally wired to do.
Yes.
But we are shamed for it.
Yeah. And I think it's a message that we need to get out and stand up and say loud over and over and over and over until it sticks. We hear it in conversations like this, one-on-one conversations. We'll hear it bits and pieces here and there, but there's no collective standing up and saying it's okay to make money. And I've experienced that firsthand in working in wellness and nutrition. People do not value what I do. They just don't. And so when you look at, a business coach versus a nutrition coach, significant difference economically in it. Yes, because this value is, well, I can get on the internet and do a 30-day program for $10 or, I'm obviously exaggerating,
but it's the same with finances, right? I'm going to go to Google because that's a finance. I get all this stuff. So I'm going to, I'm going to go buy Dave Ramsey's book and then be able to do whatever. It's like, great, but you're still in a cycle, like you haven't broken through, right? But if he aligns with your values, great, but you still, it's like, so then you get pulled into all the other programs, right? So now you're spending more money as you're supposed to be, debt-free and investing and, building whatever assets you're supposed to be building for, children's inheritance or community good, which I don't hear, it's always funny. It's like, I always listen to people talk about, building their empires. Very rarely do I hear how their businesses are going to benefit the communities where the business is located or where their employees live, work, and play.
Yes, which is so important.
It is important because it affects, right? So, I mean, if you think about poorer communities, that's where more cancer, more drinking water issues are, because we put businesses and they're usually, people of color that lives, poor whites and people of color that live in these communities that can't afford to move.
Yeah.
Right. So, so I get the, nutrition coach makes, most coaches don't make a whole lot. It's very rare that coaches of any type are making, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, right? Or millions of dollars in revenue. It's very few of them. Yeah. And at the same point, it's this idea that it's like, we also live in a society of like, well, there should be a recipe for that. There should be this magic pill. And like, I don't have to do any work, right? So the idea of like, I want to make full-time income on, part-time hours. It's like, well, that's great, but that doesn't work. What it takes for you, right? It's sort of the thing of like, and I look at a lot of, direct sales. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but do you know what it takes for you to get into that level? Is like you're going to work 100 hours a week till you get to the place where you can do your 4 to 6 to 10 hours a week, making a great living.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. There are no quick fixes to anything.
Not at
We know
all.
that. I mean, a budget, we can find budgeting is
Oh
easy,
my
black and
God.
white budgeting. Following, me telling you that an avocado is better than a bag of Doritos. I mean, we know those things, but
Right.
how easy is it to implement those things and then make that the consistency in your life?
Right.
That's the hard part. That's the
Because
inside.
because of what you mentioned earlier, right? Intellectually know it. It's not hard. The math is easy. The math is mathing. But until we get into why do I feel embarrassed about this? What is my true motivation around this? Why am I not even looking at this? Right? What is it? That's the issue. That's where all the recipes in the world are not gonna work, because we're not being honest about, hey, I did this, or I did it unconsciously because I didn't know any better. And to be honest, that we didn't know any better. And it's really okay that we didn't know any better. But now that we know differently, right? Like now we have more information, we have to do something that is different in order for, and it's always just like a 1% adjustment. It's not we're going to do a 180-degree pivot and then wonder why, like in the midst of making that pivot, like we create catastrophe.
Yeah. That's important. That consistent, compounding of the little things every single day.
Exactly.
Yeah, those are significant. Well, I have loved having you here, and I would love for you to share with the audience where they can find you. You have coaching programs and you do a lot of things, and you have a website. So I would love for you to share that.
So on all social media, I'm Audrey L. Godwin. The website is theaudreycompany.com. Right now, we're enrolling for a 10-week Position for Profit experience. We also have a 6-month, what we call Profit Lab. So once you learn the concepts, you get to practice it for 6 months, so that this really becomes the way you manage your finances, for the rest of your days.
This is great. This is great. The accountability piece that we were talking about is so important. Well, loved being here. I mean, I always say I love doing this because there are always so many things that we could talk about. So rich. Thanks for supporting me. Thanks for supporting the community and the work that you do.
Thank you.
And audience, just thank you for being here today. We appreciate your time. You can find us every week here. Thursdays, generally Thursdays. Today is not 1:00 Eastern time on Aging Like a Badass. Have a great week. This is Kimberly Price, your 40-something host of Aging Like a Badass. See you every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time on W4WN Radio, as we come together to break the rules, ignore the critics, and age like a badass.